Good morning and welcome to Live Without Limits. Transform your thinking to redesign your life. I'm your host, Davida Shensky, and today we're talking about something that many people struggle with, but everyone needs self-care. Therefore, the title of this program is The Power of Self-Care. Why taking care of yourself is the key to thriving. When you hear self care, what comes to mind? For many, it's bubble baths, spa days, or little treats. These can be wonderful, but true self care is so much more than that. It's about honoring your body, your mind, and your spirit every day so that you don't just survive, you thrive. So, here are some questions to think about as we go through this episode. When was the last time that you put yourself first without feeling guilt? What does self care really mean? Let's start with what self care really is. Self care is not selfish, it's an act of self respect. It's choosing habits, routines, and boundaries that protect your well being so that you can show up at your best. And it goes far beyond pampering. There are four major dimensions to self care: the physical, which is movement, rest, monitoring, nutrition, and hydration. And then there's the emotional, acknowledging feelings, practicing compassion, saying no. Mental, staying curious, managing stress, cultivating calm. Spiritual, connecting with your values, practicing mindfulness, spending time in nature or prayer. Here's the difference between indulgence and care. Self indulgence is often an escape, self care is an investment. One leaves you in the same place, the other makes you stronger for the future. So, what self care really means beyond the spa days and the bubble baths? Most people think of self care as rest, relaxation, indulgence, or pampering. These can be part of self care, but they are not the whole picture. True self care is the intentional practice of supporting your physical, emotional, mental, social, and spiritual well being so that you can live a healthy, meaningful, sustainable life. It's not just something that you do when you're burnt out. It's a lifestyle, a philosophy of tending to your needs with self respect, awareness, and responsibility. Self care is not about escape, it's about alignment. Self care isn't primarily about avoiding stress or difficulty. It's about giving yourself the tools, the energy, and the clarity to handle life's challenges with resilience. Think less. I need relief from my life. And more. How do I build a life that doesn't require constant escape? The real purpose of self care is the foundation that allows you to function well, maintain a healthy relationship, pursue your goals, manage stress, prevent emotional and physical collapse. It fuels the ability to think clearly, to set boundaries, to show up authentically, to heal from the past, to grow into who you were meant to be. In other words, self-care makes your life workable. Self-care is not indulgence. Self-indulgence is instant gratification. Self-care is sustainable nourishment. Self-indulgence says, I want this now. Self-care says, I need this to be well long term. Sometimes self-care feels good. Sometimes it's uncomfortable. Sometimes it asks you to make choices you'd rather avoid. Self-care is going to therapy, sleeping enough, saying no, eating nourishing foods, budgeting, exercising, having hard conversations, letting go of toxic relationships. Self-care is everything that keeps you well. Now, let's get into the 7 dimensions of true self-care. Physical self-care, supporting your body's health. For example, nutrition, rest, movement, medical care, hydration, sexual health, recovery time. This is foundational. When your body suffers, everything else does. Emotional self-care, feeling, expressing, and managing your emotions, naming your feelings, allowing yourself to cry, asking for support, noticing emotional triggers, self-soothing practices, journaling, therapy. Emotional self-care says, my feelings matter and I deserve space to process them. Mental self-care, practicing your mind, or rather, let's say it this way, protecting your mind and thought patterns, managing self-talk, learning new things, resting from stimulation, reducing digital overwhelm, challenging limiting beliefs, mindfulness. Mental self-care is the practice of guarding your inner narrative. Social self-care, nurturing healthy relationships and boundaries, spending time with uplifting people, asking for help, saying no, leaving harmful relationships, keeping supportive community. Social self-care reminds you you don't have to do life alone. Now, I want to get into this a little bit further with each of these because I think that's so important, and then we'll move on from here. But physical self-care, that there's so much that makes us fully present, and often you will notice that someone who's lost an important partner in their life, that they go through a deep depression, and we all have certain needs in our life, and nutrition is one of them. And nutrition is so important. And remember, if different cultures come to where they grow up eating certain types of food, or their body tolerates certain foods better than others, and understanding what is good for you and what isn't good for you can help you get to where you can take care of yourself. Now, we talk about medical care, and often you will find that as we get older, and often the way the insurance is set up, that someone who's considered a senior that they're often assigned a primary care doctor, and they often go in once rather than once a year, say every 3 months or every 6 months. But a lot of that is because you don't know what can happen in a matter of a month. And understanding just where your body is, and especially in young children and in older adults, it's easier to attract illnesses that are airborne, and we often have to take time to have that recovery time. And your emotional self-care, that means that you're being nourished by by being supported. And when we are starting a business or we're starting into our career, we often need that emotional security because we are just now beginning to experience and at the beginning of a career, and we don't always know where we're going to end up in our career later on in life. And we're often just beginning to test the waters. So it's important that you have someone else that you can turn to that will give you the encouragement to achieve and move in the direction that you were meant to be. And learning, we're going to talk about mental self-care, but remember this: learning never ends. You may finish your formal education after high school or after college, but you never stop learning in life. Social self-care, this means that, remember this, we can't live isolated. We need other people in our lives because we're a social human being by nature. And nourishing that side of you is very important. Now we're going to get into the spiritual self-care. And often people will look at this as meaning religion, but religion is only part of it. There's many different ways that you can get into your spirituality. This is why, remember this, that when you become so ingrained that you want to push your spiritual beliefs on someone else and dictate to them what they think and how, you are being prejudicial, because everyone has a right to believe what they want to believe. So connecting to meaning, purpose, and values, meditation or prayer, time in nature, reflective journaling, value-driven action, rituals that ground you, spiritual self-care says, I belong, I matter, I have purpose. Often we equate all of this to religion, but it doesn't have to be, because you can be in tune to nature, birds, animals, anything, because you can learn from nature. You can learn from watching other animals and how they relate to each other, because a human being, everything you learn, but in an animal, everything is inborn and they automatically know how to take care of themselves. That's why a baby has to be nurtured and taught. And as they grow, they become more and more knowledgeable, more and more spiritual, more and more whatever. But we take on the values and the beliefs of the people that we were raised by. And you cannot dictate to someone what they should believe or care about. Practical self-care, crafting systems that support stability, budgeting, organizing your space, planning meals, time management, paying bills, scheduling appointments. These reduce stress and support future well-being. Now, often when we're talking about practical self-care, this is how you live your life, how you take care of yourself as an adult, and how you teach a child to take care of themselves. This is why often when parents smother their children and dictate everything to them about their lives, they're taking away their ability to learn how to take care of themselves. Professional purpose and self-care. Maintaining healthy work-life balance and growth. Resting from work. Setting limits on hours. Pursuing meaningful skills. Taking breaks. Celebrating professional wins. Leaving harmful workplace. Purpose gives life directions. It's measurable self-respect. The unforgettable side, or rather, let's say it this way, the uncomfortable side of self-care. Real self-care often asks you to do things that aren't relaxing. Holding boundaries, cutting ties, going to appointments, facing uncomfortable truths, admitting that you are not okay, taking responsibility, doing the things that you've avoided. It's not always cozy, it's often gritty, emotional, and transformative. It's the hardest thing that leads us to live a better life. The reason that I want to cover this a little bit more in depth is because these are things that you will see often when someone doesn't want to accept responsibility for their own behaviors and they try to put it off on someone else. That's the uncomfortable side of self-care. And that means that individual is so lost and so insecure that they just don't want to change. They would rather put it off on someone else instead of taking more control over their lives and taking more responsibility for their own actions. The core belief behind self-care: I am worthy of care, protection, and nourishment. Without this belief, self-care feels selfish, unnecessary, or low priority. Let's talk about what it's not for a minute. Selfishness, a luxury, self-indulgence, a reward you earn, something only done when overwhelmed, only practical relaxation, because self-care is maintenance, not crisis response. And if you don't take care of yourself, if you think of it in terms of being selfish or a luxury or self-indulgent, then what's happening is you're not taking care of yourself. It can lead to health problems. It can also lead to being in bad relationships where you're either being abused or you are allowing someone to control you and live your life for you, and blaming others when you don't know how to take responsibility, because you never know when you will be left alone. And if you're left alone, then you're totally lost and you don't know how to take care of yourself. So now let's talk about the evolution of self-care. Survival, avoiding burnout, fixing emergencies. Stage 2, maintenance, consistent habits, leads to protecting your well-being. Stage 3, expansion, growth, using energy to build your dreams. Most people only reach stage 1 and wonder why they're stuck. Truth self-care supports you all the way to stage 3. Why so many people struggle with self-care? Because they are taught their needs don't matter. They fear disappointing others. They feel guilty resting. They don't know what they need. They think it's selfish. They think they are always in survival mode. They are disconnected from their own emotions. They don't have boundaries. They value productivity over well-being. Healing these beliefs is self-care. And this is where we all tend to have to deal with and work on these issues. Because yes, it's important if you've got a spouse that's sick, that they need help. But often you will find someone, instead of bringing someone in to allow themselves time for themselves, what they do is they give up caring for themselves and they allow that person to become their total life. We have to learn to take care of ourselves. We have to be connected to what we're feeling. We need to learn how to set boundaries and understand how it is so important to take care of ourselves, because when that person's gone, we're going to be forced to. The deep truth. Let's look at self-care, which is not about adding more to your life. It's about removing what harms you and prioritizing what sustains you. It's the decision to live in harmony with what your body, heart, and mind need. Self-care is the practice of talking your own well-being seriously. So, let's look at it this way. The practice of taking care of your own well-being is also, you need to take it very serious. What does self-care really mean? Self-care is more than preparing. Popular culture often equates self-care with bubble baths, spa days, or traveling to the desert. Those can be expressions of self-care, but they aren't the whole picture. The self-care is about sustainability, not escape. Practices that restore, nourish, and strengthen you so that you can thrive long term. Self-care is holistic. It covers multiple dimensions of wellness, not just one area of life. Physical, eating nutritious food, exercising, sleeping well, keeping medical appointments. I want to get into a little bit about self-care because often there is a condition called sleep apnea that disrupts our sleep. And when that happens, you don't get a good night's sleep. And you'll often hear people say, I have insomnia. But I believe that if you will take a sleep test. It will give you a good idea of whether or not you have sleep apnea or not, because this is a condition that disrupts your sleep and can affect your health. Emotional, acknowledging feelings, processing stress, practicing self-compassion, and journaling. Mental and intellectual, taking breaks, setting boundaries, stimulating your mind with learning. Spiritual, prayer, meditation, time in nature, reflecting on your values and purpose. Social, building healthy relationships, limiting toxic interactions, surrounding yourself with support. Practical, financial, managing money responsibly, organizing your environment to reduce stress. Self-care is an act of responsibility, not selfishness. Many people avoid self-care because they see it as indulgent or selfish. In reality, you can't give your best to others if you're running on empty. By caring for yourself, you increase your capacity to care for your family, perform at work, and show up in relationships. Self care is preventative, not reactive. Too often, people wait until they're exhausted, sick, or burnt out before they pay attention to themselves. Real self care is about prevention, building rhythms and habits that protect your well being before crisis hits. Think of it as like a car maintenance, regular oil changes, prevent breakdowns on the highway. Self care is personal and evolving. What restores one person may not restore another. For example, an extrovert will recharge by going out with friends. An introvert will recharge by reading quietly. Your needs also change over time. A young parent's self-care might be a nap. A retiree self-care might be volunteering or traveling. The key is turning in to your own body and mind and asking, what do I need right now? I think this is something we all need to consider and think about, and how we will take care of ourselves. What are your needs right now? Self care is about boundaries. Sometimes self care means saying yes to rest and no to obligations that drain you. Boundaries protect your energy, your time, and mental health. Without boundaries, self care becomes impossible because you're constantly giving without replenishing. Self care is a daily practice. Self care is not something that you schedule once a year during vacation. It's in the daily rituals: drinking water, stretching, meditating, journaling, sleeping. Small, consistent actions compounded over the resilience. Now, let's quickly go over the 7 types of self care framework. The definition of physical self care is nurturing your body through healthy choices, rest, and activity. Emotional self care is turning into processing and expressing your emotions in healthy ways. Mental and intellectual self care is stimulating and resting your mind to maintain clarity and curiosity. Spiritual self care is connecting to your values, your beliefs, and your sense of purpose. Social self care is building supportive, healthy, and nurturing relationships. Practical and financial self care is managing daily responsibilities and resources to reduce stress. Environmental self care is creating surroundings that support your well being. The key here is that self care is multidimensional. You don't need to master them all at once, but start by asking, now, why taking care of yourself matters? Because your physical health, when you take care of your body, you prevent illnesses and boost your energy. Sleep, nutrition, and exercise are the foundation for everything else. Mental health, self care helps you manage stress and reduce anxiety and depression. Without it, burnout creeps in quickly. Relationships, you can't pour from an empty cup. When you're well rested and emotionally balanced, you're more patient, more loving, and more present with others. Productivity. Many people think that self care will slow you down, but it makes you more effective. It recharges your mind and sharper and more creative. So now let's quickly look at why self care matters, the deep layers of impact. Self care serves the 5 layers of human functioning: biological, psychological, emotional, relational, and purpose or legacy. Each layer builds on the one below it. When self care is neglected at any layer, the weakness ripples upward. When practiced well, strength expands outward. So let's explore it. The biological foundation. My body keeps me alive. And self care begins with the body because you can't think clearly if your brain is exhausted. You can't show up for others when you're in chronic survival mode. You can't live your purpose if your health collapses. What's happening beneath the surface? The body is always working to keep you safe and alive. But without rest, nourishment, and downtime, it becomes stuck in chronic stress mode, the fight or flight, and the freeze mentality. So this isn't indulgence, it's maintenance to your core operating system. The psychological grounding. My mind needs stability. Once the body is supported, the mind becomes capable of clarity. Self care regulates your focus, your perception, your decision making, your memory, your internal narratives, your meaning in making. Chronic stress shrinks the prefrontal cortex, that part with the responsibility for reasoning and planning. that strengthens the amygdala, the fear and negativity. Self-care practices allow the brain to calm, reactively, think rationally, problem solve, learn, integrate new experiences. Self care shifts us from survival thinking to strategic thinking. Emotional regulation. My feelings are data that I must honor. After the mind becomes stable, emotional life can be processed instead of avoided or suppressed. So, why this layer matters? Unmanaged emotions hijack decision making, create patterns of sabotage, cause relationship breakdown, fuel anxiety, anger, and shame. Self care gives space for naming what you feel, releasing what hurts, understanding your inner world, and integrating past experiences. Relational functioning, how I care for myself, shapes how I connect. Without emotional capacity, we cannot form healthy relationships. Now, let's kind of get into this a little bit more into detail simply because, in so many ways, how we deal with things often looks at how we begin to take on different things in our lives, how we relate to what's actually going on in our lives. So, when we are depleted, we overgive, we people please, we tolerate harm, we withdraw, we become resentful. When we are nourished, we communicate honestly, we show up consistently, we choose healthy relationships, we hold boundaries without guilt because your relationship with others can only be as healthy as your relationship with yourself. If this layer breaks, it creates codependency, which leads to isolation and leads to cycles of conflict. If this layer thrives, commu- community leads to mutual support, leads to love, leads to belonging. Now, the last thing we're going to talk about is how purpose and legacy and self care expands into contribution. Once the physical, mental, emotional, and relational needs are nurtured, a person becomes capable of living purposefully. Self care fuels creativity, vision, trust in oneself, courage to take risks, capacity for service, sustainable emotion. A burnt out person cannot dream, innovate, lead, survive, inspire others. This purpose requires energy, clarity, and emotional capacity. Self care becomes the soil from which impact plus fulfillment plus legacy leads to growth. This is the top layer, and it often becomes possible when the lower layers are supported. Why taking care of yourself matters? Well, now we got into a lot of that already, so let's look at some of the other things. And what I would like to deal with is that Self-care creates a space for reflection, alignment between action and values to protect your passion from burnout. Now, we also want to prevent crisis, and this is something that we've talked about and dealt with. So let's quickly go over it. What prevention means to self-care. Self-care is like maintenance, the small, inconsistent actions that keep you running smoothly. Why people wait until crisis. Mindset traps. I'll rest once the busy season ends. I don't deserve downtime unless I've earned it. The cost of crisis living. Physically, stress builds up into chronic health issues, high blood pressure, heart disease, fatigue. The bottom line is that waiting until crisis hits costs more time, energy, and health that steady maintenance ever would. So let's take a look at the key picture of it. So we've gone, a sustainable self-care plan is personalized, fits your needs and lifestyle, practical, starts small and builds gradually, protected, requires boundaries and accountability, flexible, adapts to changing seasons of life, reflection prompts for, and let's bring this home. Self-care is not selfish. It's not optional. It's the foundation that allows you to be healthy, prevent, present, and purposeful. When you take care of yourself, you're not just investing in you, you're investing in everyone and everything you touch. So here's your challenge for this week. Choose one self-care habit and start today. Maybe it's going to bed earlier, drinking more water, journaling, and saying no to something that doesn't serve you. You deserve it. And I want to thank you for joining me today in this episode. And I want you to share it with a friend who needs a reminder that caring for themselves is not a luxury, it's a necessity. And until next time, remember, when you make yourself a priority, you empower yourself to live without limits.